Mr. Holland Opus movie relates the story of a composer who has a music teacher certification. He decides to take a job as a music teacher at the John F. Kennedy High School. At the beginning, the relationship between the students and Mr. Holland was not exist. The students were not interested in learning music. Mr. Holland brings to the class music according to the children's generation. Mr. Holland helps the students to love music by teaching them different types of music like rock and roll from the Beatles, marching band, and classical music from Beethoven. He fell in love with his job and stayed there for 3 years. He helped the students all the time, providing private lessons for those who need it. With the time his family grew up, he had a son named Cole, who was a deaf mute child. So Mr. and Mrs. Holland have to learn sign language to communicate with their child. As the movie progresses, the viewer can observe how Mr. Holland changed students' lives for the better. On the movie, the viewer can observe topics like tracking, student-teaching relationship, special education, and funding. At the end of the movie, you can see how Mr. Holland impacts students' lives by giving them the opportunity to grow up to be someone in the society, like a governor, a marine, a school board member. Then Mr. Holland just retired.
Funding was a major plot of the movie. Mr. Holland had received his teaching certificate way before the time in the movie. He got his certificate as a tool he would use to fall back on something. He believed that teaching job would give him free time to do what he really wanted to do, which was to compose songs. Throughout the movie, he finds that this would not be the case. Although, as the movie progresses, his desire to compose songs diminishes, and his love for teaching increases. There are many times where they stress the importance of money in schools. When the school got together to think about the budget allowed to them, they often decided to cancel many of the school events. The first events to be thrown out were the artistic events. In these, the music departments were included. To keep his events intact, Mr. Holland had to compromise with the football coach to fundraise and use their students to create an event where both parties benefit. By the end of the movie, Mr. Holland is fired or removed from his teaching position because of funding. The schools opted to get rid of the music, acting, and drama programs in the school, thus costing Mr. Holland's job. Funding by the school board was a recurrent problem happening in the school. Why is this such a big problem for teachers? As mentioned in the text, Introduction to Teaching, funding for school comes from 3 main sources, which are the local community, the state, and the federal government. This money is acquired in many ways. There is income tax, such as personal income tax and corporate income tax. There is also property tax, which are taxes paid on tangible and intangible property. There are sale taxes that are present when purchasing products or a service. Some of the most common federal agencies that provide funding to schools are the Education Department, the Department of Labor, and the Natural Science Foundation, and many others. There are many other ways schools can gather funds that might not be conventional, like lotteries and gambling by setting up casinos. It is very important for schools to properly budget their funds. As we see throughout the movie, the schools were always on top of budgeting and deciding what was important for the school. As mentioned in the text, in times of tight budgets and tax limitations, very difficult choices have to be made. Some examples are increasing class sizes or keeping equipment for future classes. One of the most noticeable was reduction in force, or RIF. We see this with Mr. Holland. These educators receive a notice that due to low funds and budget cuts, they may not have a job for the next school year. By the end of the movie, Mr. Holland fights for the student's education and his job, even though he says it's not because of that. He wasn't happy his students didn't have options available to them, thus giving them a chance to explore new things. Unfortunately, the school still decided to cut the art classes, including the music program.
Mr. Holland is a music teacher whose passion for music is genuine. As a good parent and teacher, he must keep track of the different stages that a child takes to learn. For example, with his son, Mr. Holland and his wife learn how his son needs to learn sign language. Another example is as a teacher. Since the beginning of the movie, he noticed how students need to improve their musical skills. In order to achieve such goal, he helps each single student that needs extra help or extra practice. The first track in practice is with the girl who played the flute. Through extra sessions, she developed better skills. Another student is the boy whose music was not his strongest abilities, but through the daily practice, he discovers his talent. Mr. Holland was able to see how tracking is part of his journey to achieve that students learn and love music.
Tracking is defined as an educational strategy that separates students from for instruction based on their academic abilities. The specific education track is based on the native language or the disability of each individual student. Other things that determine the educational tracking of each individual student requires first teacher to identify the socioeconomic status, the education level, and their academic potential. Unfortunately, tracking can be viewed as a racist idea, since, as mentioned in the text, tracking has led to the resegregation of students based on race, class, and language into separate programs within the school. While Mr. Holland did use tracking in his teachings, his was not over the top or exaggerated. He only basically helped students if they needed the help, as we saw with the clarinet player and the football player.
On the first day of school, Mr. Holland had a hard time grabbing the students' attention. No one listened to him when he would ask questions about what music meant to them. Mr. Holland used lecture to help his students out. When all of the students had failed a test, he used questioning and discussion to go over the test. After teaching his class for 5 months, he realized that his students weren't learning, so he started playing music that they knew. But the principal and vice principal were upset when he started teaching them about rock and roll. They wanted him to play classic music, since that was part of the school curriculum. When Mr. Holland's son was born, they found out that their son had a 90% hearing loss. He had a hard time trying to communicate with him, and he wouldn't take his time to understand him. They didn't know how to handle their child. Mrs. Holland was frustrated not being able to communicate with her son. They later found a private school for deaf children. Later on, Mr. Holland finally took his time to understand his child's needs and was able to communicate with him.